Welcome, everybody, to our third edition of Hatching Hour. My name is Jose Ocaño. I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Hatching. And Angel, I'd love for you to introduce yourself as well.
Yes, my name is Angel Guzman. I am the COO and co-founder of Hatching as well.
Yes, and we're so excited to have Sara Schairer here with us. You'll hear a little bit more about her and, most importantly, from her later today. Today's topic is Beyond Burnout, Cultivating Compassion for a Healthier and Happier Workplace. And so before we get into the topic, I want to make sure y'all know how to connect with us. You can follow us on our website. You can connect to us directly. You can follow us on all the social media. We're on Instagram. We are on Facebook. We are starting to do a little more work on LinkedIn. And we also have a YouTube channel where you can catch the recordings of the first and the second Hatching Hour as well. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why did we choose this topic? Whenever I'm in meetings or conversations with leaders, I'll ask folks like, what are some of the things you're challenged by? How can I be of service? And more often than not, it's either number one or number two. It's something to do with the staff is burnt out. Our team is just like, we're not seeing, people are burnt out. The motivation's not there. We're seeing high levels of turnover and it's impacting our operations. We're having to limit our hours of operation, our business goals. If you're in the animal welfare, animal well-being space, maybe it's your life-saving goals is something that's being impacted. And so we really thought that this is a really prevalent thing. And so we started to do a little research. And so Angel, if you want to share that first slide, just to kind of ground us in a little bit of data that isn't necessarily animal welfare centric. So research by Deloitte found that 77% of workers have experienced burnt out at their current job. And the top driver of burnout is a lack of support or recognition from leadership, that disconnect from the highest person to the most junior level person. There's a lot of layers sometimes, and that disconnect can create burnout. So a report by Gallup and WorkHuman discovered turnover and lost productivity due to employee burnout cost businesses around $322 billion. And when you think about the cost of turnover, it can range anywhere between 15 and 20% of your annual payroll. So there not only is a cost from a morale perspective, there is an actual financial cost to this. Indeed revealed that while more than half, 52% of workers reported feeling burnt out, there is a disconnect between age groups. So while only 31% of baby boomers identified as feeling burnt out, 59% of millennials and 58% of Gen Z respondents also felt that. And we'll talk a little bit later about how that is kind of showing up, especially considering that millennials and Gen Z are becoming more and more part of the workforce, and especially millennials are starting to take on more roles of power and influence. And so we're going to start to see how some of that starts to shift the workforce. I asked Angel if he would be willing to share one of his experiences working at Wells Fargo, because I felt like knowing and seeing him live through his time at Wells Fargo, so many of these things weren't just a bullet point, it was real life. It's his real life experience. So Angel, if you could share a little bit with us, I'd appreciate that.
Sure, yeah. So in 2011, I joined Wells Fargo Bank's conversion team, and I worked there in Arizona. And I was tasked with facilitating the merger of Wachovia and Wells Fargo in New York and Florida. So having previously worked in Arizona, I was well-versed in the company's culture and their business operations. So my role involved supporting and training Wachovia staff during this transition. And so while Wells Fargo provided comprehensive training on policies, procedures, products, and sales goals, there was a huge gap in addressing the human aspect of this transition. So I remember on my first day at the bank, it was clear that the cultural shift and emotional distress that team members were experiencing would be a major challenge. And so initially, I was viewed as the Wells Fargo bad guy from Arizona. And so this was primarily in Florida, where I actually was a manager and had a bank that I worked at every day. So I represented all of the fear that they held. And so it was discouraging to realize that at the time, Wells Fargo had not provided any training for managers to help their teams cope with it. They provided all of the tools on how to sell, how to, process transactions and all of the infrastructure. But there was no mention of how are these team members feeling? How are these Wachovia employees? There's so much change in their life, and how are we dealing with that? So there was employee assistance consulting, and that was the one of the only support systems that we had, but there was not a systemic training or support system there. There was no resources on dealing with the grief, loss, fear, or all the emotions that come with change. So team members were thrust into these new roles with new responsibilities, new equipment. There was a new organizational chart, new tools, and aggressive sales targets. So like many managers, I was left to fill in the blanks and solve for this systemic oversight. To succeed, I had to really bridge the gap between my team's current state and the company's expectations. My primary focus was on building trust and creating an environment where team members felt seen and heard. And without the trust and respect, succeeding and meeting the company's expectations would be really impossible. So I approached the team with a spirit of compassion and curiosity. I was striving to learn their strengths and determining how best to support them as individuals. And creating a healthier workplace culture in the situation, it took time. It required patience, thoughtfulness, and a lot of grit. And we faced numerous struggles due to the sales pressures that were placed on us. We were understaffed and we were pushed beyond our limits. I spent 60 to 80 hours a week. So a lot of my salaried colleagues were there 5-6 days a week from 7:30 in the morning all the way till 8 o'clock at night. And I spent countless hours on conference calls, morning, afternoon, and evening, sharing what did you do, sales wise? What did you produce today? There was no mention or ask about how we felt, how the team was feeling. And so there were company-wide efforts to address employee engagement, but they were really performative, like we got to wear jeans on a Friday, or we got a pizza party once in a while. So, but those things are small wins and small band-aids. And a lot of the engagement was created by people who don't carry out the work. They were executives that really don't know what it is to be on the ground floor and how to interact with those kind of clients. So despite these challenges, we managed to transform our location's workplace culture as much as we could within the circumstances that we had. We supported each other through these challenges, and we built a strong team that delivered efficient and quality service to our customers. And I hold that team and colleagues in high regard and continue to maintain friendships with them. They're wonderful people. I love the customers and the people I worked with. It was just a systemic issue within the company. And so hopefully some of them may be on the call, and hopefully some of them will hear this recording. As many are aware, Wells Fargo faced lawsuits and subsequently overhauled their company goals and strategies due to the conditions and their culture. Unfortunately, I was not there to see that. I left the company before those changes took place. We lost a lot of really good team members, a lot of dedicated people that just couldn't weather the storm. So my experience here at Wells Fargo underscores the importance and the need for more compassionate leadership, prioritizing employee well-being. And it gives me hope to see more companies and thought leaders like Sara Schairer recognizing this and taking measures to prevent burnout and high turnover. So this is another reason why we created Hatching. We want to help people live better and work better so that others can have the knowledge and tools to weather the harsh conditions and reduce this type of trauma in the workplace. And my hope is that this Hatching Hour inspires some action. Whether you're in a position of power or not, we all deserve and have a responsibility in creating a healthier workplace, regardless of industry or the size of the company. So thank you so much for allowing me to share that experience.
No, thank you so much, Angel. And it was, watching you navigate that, for the many years you were there, I learned so much that I brought into my roles, watching you just elegantly, delicately balance what you just described. So next up, I want to just share a little bit about our special guest, Sara.
So Sara Schairer is the founder and executive director of Compassion Inc. Sara is an adjunct faculty member at the San Diego State University, where she teaches workshops on compassionate systems, self-compassion, listening, burnout prevention, and mindfulness. She also created a one-of-a-kind reversible Compassion It wristband on 6 continents, 50 plus countries, and all 50 states.
Sara, thank you so much for being here. Would you do me the honor of doing a little grounding for all of us?
I would love to. I would like to ground us all in compassion. before we get started. So we're going to do just a brief practice with a little bit of breathing, and then I'm going to invite you to think of a time that you experienced compassion, and we'll hang out in that feeling of compassion for a moment before we come back together. So I invite you to find a nice grounded posture, and if you'd like, you can close the eyes or cast the gaze down. And let's take a few deep cleansing breaths together. So exhaling everything out, inhaling through the nose, filling your lungs all the way up. And then a long, slow exhale out of the mouth. Again, inhaling through the nose and exhaling. And once more, inhaling and exhaling. And now just closing the lips and breathing in and out of the nostrils. Relaxing the forehead and the eyes and the jaw, the whole face. Softening the shoulders and the abdomen, softening the hands. And just settling into this peaceful experience of breathing in and breathing out. Noticing if the mind is planning and looking ahead or checking off the need to do lists, or maybe it's looking back. See if you can bring the mind to this moment, to breathing in and breathing out. Feeling grounded in the body and through the breath. And from this place of groundedness, I invite you to think back on a time that you experienced compassion. So it might be a time when you noticed someone struggling and you helped that person, or maybe you were struggling, someone came to your aid, or maybe you noticed compassion happening in front of your eyes. Let's see if you can put yourself back in that moment with as much detail as you can, noticing where you were and what was happening, who was there, what you hear and what you see, and now tuning into what you're feeling in the body. What does compassion feel like in the body? Where are you feeling it? What's the sensation? If you'd like to anchor that feeling by placing a hand on the heart, taking a deep breath in and breath out. And now bringing your attention back to this moment by feeling the feet and the hands and noticing the breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I would love for you to share maybe a word or a sentence of how compassion felt. What did compassion feel like for you? What did you notice? Or if anybody wants to unmute and just share the feeling that they felt, not going into the story. But what did you notice? Relief. Thank you. So safety. Beautiful. Soft. Calm. Anybody notice where they felt that? Flow. Thanks, Shania. Understanding.
I felt
Beautiful.
mine right here.
Is that your belly and heart kind of belly area? Beautiful. And chest. Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. Well, I'm here today because I think we need more of that feeling in this world, in our workplaces, in our homes, in our communities, everywhere. So that's why I do the work that I do, and that's why I'm so grateful that Jose and Angel invited me to be here with you all. So thank you. Again, my name is Sara, and I'm the founder of Compassionate, which is a nonprofit organization. It's been around now for 11 years, and I lead compassion trainings in many different places, organizations, schools, educational institutions, healthcare, you name it, because all of us can benefit from compassion and self-compassion. We're going to focus a lot on self-compassion, because burnout is so pervasive, as those statistics that Jose was sharing earlier, and Angel shared his story from Wells Fargo. This idea that we can take care of ourselves is not something that most of us are taught. We're going to focus a lot on that, and then also on how to create more compassionate workplaces depending on how time goes. But I will start by just sharing a little bit about the book that I published this year in January. It's called A Case for Compassion: What Happens When We Prioritize People and the Planet. And I've been teaching individuals compassion for many, many years. And I feel like even though I've been able to reach thousands of people, I'm not really seeing the needle move very far in our world. And I thought, you know what, it's time to zoom out and look at this from a more systemic point of view. And let's look at our systems. What we need is more compassionate systems, because we are products of our systems. So I examined 5 systems: education, the workplace, corrections, law enforcement. And I write about, where they are now, share some statistics and stories. It's not really good. And then I show examples, or write about examples of places where compassion is a main pillar in that organization or that system. And I share those outcomes. And then I give it some ideas for how we can get there. The book is pretty little and quite accessible. And so I'm now sort of switching gears from, I'm still teaching individual people how to practice compassion for themselves and others, but I'm also helping organizations create systems that allow for compassion. I tell people all the time, don't hire me to come in and teach your workers self-compassion so that you can continue to work them too hard. That's not what I'm here to do. Let's look at how you're treating your employees and creating a place where they feel cared for and where they can care for each other.
I do want to just read this passage that I thought was really powerful, because I'm someone in the work that I did, especially in my last role where I was the senior director of people and culture. I was really, really driven by the employee experience. And in my philosophy is, if you take care of the people and you have the right systems in place, they're going to take care of the business, whatever that business is. And we know that there's a lot of research around that. And something that sometimes people would say in meetings where people were talking about culture is they would make a reference to like coddle culture, and they would kind of liken coddling the staff with compassion. And then I read this part of your book that really resonated with me. It's on page 142, and it says, some of you might believe that being a compassionate leader implies weakness, a leader who ignores low performance and avoids difficult conversations. You may think a compassionate leader comes across as too touchy-feely and not down to earth. However, compassionate leaders show courage and strength. They set goals, demand high performance, offer candid feedback, and yes, they even terminate employees who aren't pulling their weight. What do compassionate leaders do differently no matter what the task is at hand? They care. They center the well-being of their people. They acknowledge and try to alleviate the suffering of their employees, their colleagues, and their customers. They also model vulnerability. If you want to be a compassionate leader, compassion should be woven into every aspect of your role. Some of the best ways to compassion it as a leader are to model vulnerability, truly listen, create opportunities for connection, and revamp your systems. That just really resonated with me, because it speaks to the balance of compassion doesn't mean all those other things. It means leading with integrity, with clarity, with transparency, and doing what you say you're going to do. And you talk a little bit about vulnerability in here, like what has been your own journey to becoming a more vulnerable leader?
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's just been immersing myself in this work and knowing that that's how we connect with each other, that we can't truly connect as humans if we don't show up as humans. And humans are struggling, every single one of us. And if we aren't willing to share that with people in our lives, then we cannot truly connect with them. And even as leaders, we need to show that we're humans as well, and that we see people on our teams as human beings. But I learned this through just learning about compassion over all these years.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think one of the parts of vulnerability begins with self-reflection, just being vulnerable with yourself, in the quietness of your mind, and just asking yourself questions with curiosity as opposed to judgment. And so I know that one of the things we want to do is a journaling exercise. So I talk about vulnerability to say, we're going to invite everybody right now to be a little vulnerable with yourself, do a little reflection, a little self introspection, because everything starts in here and in here. And so Sara is going to guide us through an exercise. So Sara, is this a visualization? Should folks have a pen and paper handy?
It'd be great if you did, if you could journal. If you don't, you can just do this in your mind, either way. But I'm going to guide you through a little visualization and then have you journal, and then do another visualization and then have you journal. So if you'd like to close your eyes or just cast the gaze down. And I want you to think about a time when someone that you care about or admire, respect, they made a mistake. And I want you to think about how you responded when they did. Maybe they came to you and shared about something that they did wrong, or you noticed something they messed up on. How did you respond? What were the words you said? What was your tone of voice? What was your body language like? How do you treat those people that you care about and respect when they make a mistake? So just reflecting on that for a moment. And now I invite you to think about a time that you messed up. You made a mistake, and notice how you reacted. What were the words you said to yourself? What was your body language like? What was your tone of voice? And you can jot down whatever comes up or just reflect on that. And now I want you to just notice the difference between the two. What you noticed was the difference between how you treated someone you care about and respect when they messed up versus how you treated yourself.
Would anyone like to share? Let's see. Scrappy, I'm always much harder myself than others. Yep. So was Felicia.
Yeah.
Angels, agreed. Yeah, I wrote initially, like when I thought of a friend, I thought compassionate and curious, supportive. And then instantly when I thought for myself, it's critical, kind of harsh, and definitely judgmental.
And Billy, thank you for that. You called yourself a dumbass. This is why self-compassion is so important, because we need to learn how to treat ourselves the same way we treat people that we care about, with kindness, with respect, with encouragement. As a coach, right? That inner voice should be more of an inner coach and less of an inner critic. But that takes some awareness, right? We need to know what we're saying to ourselves, and we need to check that and be encouraging and kind. So that is why self-compassion is something we all need, because again, we're not, most of us are not taught this. We haven't seen this modeled for us throughout our lives. And many of us think, well, I have to be hard on myself. I've succeeded all these years because I have. And there's plenty of research that shows that self-compassionate people still achieve and are still successful. And boy, do they feel a lot better. And they're much more resilient, because when they mess up, they say, okay, I messed up. I'm human. You can do this, Sara. What did you learn? Let's move on. And when you're hard on yourself, guess what? Productivity goes down. You might kind of get sad and hang out, have a little spiral maybe for a bit. So these skills of self-compassion don't make us weaker. They actually do make us more accountable and still high achievers. So that's why we're focusing on self-compassion. So do you want me to maybe define self-compassion?
Yeah, so that's when we wanted to, talk about what self-compassion is. And I agree with you. The harder we are on ourselves, the harder we are on other people. And so the easier we are to ourselves, and have that self-compassion, we can offer that more abundantly to others.
So true. And, we've all heard the idea that you can't pour from an empty cup, right? That's part of self-compassion too. If you're not taking care of yourself is a big part of self-compassion, not just, using a kind words. You also have to take care of yourself, and that allows you to care for others. So self-compassion, I like to define it using Kristen Neff's research. She's the main researcher in self-compassion. She comes out of the University of Texas at Austin, and she defines it as having three main pillars. The first one is mindfulness of your own suffering, which makes sense, right? We have to be aware that we're suffering in order to respond to that. Compassion is a response to suffering. So we have to be able to pause and say, oh, what's happening within my body? What are my emotions right now? What's my mind doing? I have to pause and be aware so that I can tend to myself. We have to be mindful of our suffering. The second pillar of self-compassion is common humanity. Any idea about what that might mean? What is common humanity?
Are you trying to unmute, Johanna?
Yes.
Perfect. Yes, I love it.
I would think that common humanity means that we're all human and let's have some humanity for each other. Even if you're in a higher position, perhaps it's maybe even more important that you have humanity.
Yeah, that's part of it. Common humanity, especially, we're focusing on self-compassion now. Common humanity reminds me that I'm not alone. I'm human like everybody else. Oftentimes when we're struggling, we feel isolated and we think, I'm the only one going through this. Or, geez, I'm on Instagram, everybody else is living this great life. What's wrong with me, right? Common humanity helps me remember, okay, others too are having a hard time right now. Others make mistakes. It's common humanity, and that really gives me a peace of mind to remember that I'm human and I'm not perfect.
Yep.
So that's the second pillar. The third pillar of self-compassion, this kind of ties into that journaling exercise, and that is self-kindness, self-encouragement. So learning how to treat yourself as a coach, as a mentor, the same way you would treat somebody you cared about. Now, I remember when I learned about this many years ago, the teacher who was teaching it said, think about the way you speak to yourself. If you spoke to any of your friends the way you speak to yourself, would you have any? And immediately my answer was, oh my gosh, I would never say the things to my friends that I say to myself. It was like automatic. And I thought, well, that is wild. How on earth can I be saying those words to myself that I would never say to people I care about? And so that was a huge aha moment for me. And I really started to try to work on my inner voice, which has, I will say, self-compassion has completely changed my life.
Yeah.
Because I'm not so hard on myself.
It's a practice. Like I'll go through times in my life where I'm a lot more aware and intentional of being kind and compassionate to it really is more of an inner cheerleader than a critic. And then I'll be stressed and overwhelmed. And when that happens, like my program that just takes over is just like, you're not doing enough. You're not good enough. Like all those things start to creep up. And creating some practices to journal or just to sit and reflect helps me to understand, what am I telling myself? And is it true? Is it not? Does it serve me? Does it not? And it makes me think a lot about a study I recently read that's related to the animal welfare space. And it was done by Best Friends Animal Society on employee engagement, employee well-being, essentially. And there was a few stats in there that really kind of confirmed what I hear and see throughout the almost 20 years, but it's startling to kind of see it on paper through a scientific analysis. And it's that 85% of the people that were surveyed self-identified as either being moderately burnt out or severely burnt out. About 55% were in the severely burnt out range. And 90% of people said that they have compassion fatigue. And so I know, Sara, in the world that we kind of work in compassion, and we have some links because you did a lot of work with Stanford. I just completed a Stanford course in compassion. And so they talk about the difference between empathic distress versus compassion fatigue. But can you tell me a little bit about how is being self-compassionate actually begin to solve for empathic distress?
Yeah, thank you. So let's start in the compassion world, we say there's no such thing as compassion fatigue. because compassion is known to energize us. So neuroscience tells us compassion gives us all of those feel-good hormones and endorphins like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. So compassion fuels us. Empathy, however, is when you're feeling what another is feeling, okay? And that drains us. So if you're in empathic distress, that's what that is, you are going to burn out. If you are truly practicing compassion and you are alleviating suffering and attuning to your own suffering at the same time, so you're not just focusing on the other being, but you are saying, what's happening within me? What do I need to in this moment? Maybe I need a couple breaths, or maybe I need a break. Maybe I need some nourishment in some way. That is vital, because otherwise you can't sustain your level of care. But people often confuse empathy and compassion and think they're the same thing. Empathy is a part of compassion. We want to connect to the feeling of another that drives us to compassion. But all empathy is that feeling the pain or connecting to the pain of another. Compassion is actually this willingness to alleviate that pain, that suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I think about being self-compassionate, it means being aware of what my needs are. It means putting healthy, reasonable boundaries in place, whether that's in my personal life or my professional life. And I think that's why I think as I've become more self-compassionate and divorce my identity and my value from like what I produce at work, shifts started to happen. And as that shift happened, I mean, that's part of why we started hatching, because it was time for a change. You know, when you're aware of something, you can't unknow it sometimes. And I'm better able to take care of myself because I have the language of what are my needs? What is a healthy boundary? I didn't grow up putting boundaries up. Growing up was not something that was common or encouraged by any means. So yeah, I really appreciate like us being able to touch base on like the difference between empathic distress and compassion fatigue, and how being compassionate to yourself is one of the best first steps of starting to just be better inside, you know.
Brene Brown, if any of you all are familiar with her work, she's a social worker and has a super famous TED Talk and books and all that. And her research shows that the most compassionate people are the ones with the firmest boundaries, the strongest boundaries, which makes sense actually, because they're able to say, okay, I need this for me. I have to resource myself. And all of that allows me to give more.
So we talked about boundaries. What are some other ways that an employee can, within an organization or someone that has a manager who doesn't prioritize compassion, what can we still do to take care of ourselves?
That's a really good question. I think one part of self-compassion that doesn't get discussed enough is reaching out for support. So making sure that you have a community around you that you can talk to and you can share what's going on. Maybe you can even ask for help if you need it. Perhaps you have a manager that isn't willing to do that, but do you have a colleague who can come in and support you? I think making sure you have a strong community is one of the top things you can do. And then we just touched on it. I mean, that boundary setting, even with a manager who's tough, I think being able to say, hey, you're putting another thing on my plate here, and you know, I'm actually at capacity. I'm taking tomorrow off, or you know, it's the weekend and I'm not going to work. Is there a way that it help me here prioritize, because I can't possibly do one more thing? So really being able to voice those boundaries and put them in place in a kind way, and I think can help in a situation like that.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a future hatching hour that's completely around boundaries, like on how do we set boundaries? Because I think as a leader and manager, if you want to be a better leader or manager, part of it is practicing it yourself, encouraging others, allowing for that. And I always say, think about the workload. Is it reasonable? Is it fair for what it's being compensated? You know, and so there's all of these systems. And it's interesting because you're seeing this kind of shift. And so I want to read another excerpt of your book that kind of spoke a little about this. And so this is on page 137, and you write, according to the Deloitte Global 2021 Millennial and Gen Z survey, millennials and Gen Zs aren't just resilient, they're channeling their energies into holding themselves and others accountable. They're the people most likely to call out racism and sexism and to shun companies and employees whose actions conflict with their personal values. Of the nearly 23,000 millennials and Gen Z surveyed, almost half of them, 49%, responded that they've made career choices based on the organization's values and ethics. Employees coming from these younger generations demand to be treated well. They're seeking compassionate workplaces. And you can't create a culture of compassion unless you have leaders who value and model compassion. So I thought it was just so interesting to talk about. I was talking to a leader recently that I work with, and I use this quote, and it's like evolve or die. And I'm like, the workforce is shifting. Millennials and Gen Z especially are saying we don't want to work that way. We're not going to be spoken to that way. We're not going to be on call all the time. We want to be paid a reasonable wage for a reasonable day's work. And we'll leave. If you don't, we'll either go work for ourselves. We can go on TikTok and make 40 grand a year just by being ourselves on TikTok, And so I think it speaks to like companies needing to make that, really make that shift. So with that shift in mind, how can executives, board members, people who hold the most power, the most influence, and because your whole book is about systems, how should we start thinking about systems? Because if you're an employee or a manager, you're kind of like doing your best, but like culture starts at the top. So how do we help those folks be more intentional and accountable?
Yeah, so we have we created just a little visual that talks about what does a compassionate workplace look like. And this is just something for people to think about. Like it's humanizing. Are you starting meetings with check-ins, making sure, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling today? If everybody's saying 1 or 2, maybe you don't dive into the agenda and you say, all right, what's going on here? Because maybe everybody's, all shook up about who knows what, the war going on in the Middle East. I mean, there's so much weighing on people right now, and we need to recognize that there are humans in the room or in the Zoom and address that before we just dive into work, right? Modeling vulnerability, offering space and time for mental health, right? We also want to make sure that people feel psychologically safe so that there are group norms. They are willing to share ideas without having any fear around that, and they can make mistakes without being afraid. We also think workplaces should be trauma informed, so leaders should know and understand the signs of trauma and have whatever needs to be in place to offer support and make it easy to request support. Like if you need housing or food security or childcare, that should be easy for employees to access. I also think that a workplace should prioritize self-compassion. So like we said, talking about boundaries or being able to tell your manager, hey, my plate's too full, making sure everybody has time to pause and reflect, making sure we learn how to learn from mistakes. We learn from mistakes, we're not beating ourselves up about it. And then I always think that a truly compassionate workplace is also thinking about the planet. I mean, we cannot ignore what's happening in the world today. That is a huge issue, and it affects us all as human beings. And a compassionate workplace takes practices to try to minimize their carbon footprints and, create a cleaner planet. So these are just small things to think about, but, I do, of course, encourage leaders to take training in compassion or even have the whole organization. I think having onboarding training that includes compassion training and self-compassion training is important. I think having the language of compassion within the organization is important. So of course I think that though, because that's my work. But I really do think that there are things that an organization can have in place that allows for compassion to just flow between colleagues, from leaders to colleagues, and so on. And, all of this goes down to clients and customers as well, right? We can't ignore that. Of course, all of this means compassion for your customers and your clients.
I love how you put that together and how it just is a visual to allow people to just self-reflect and take a moment. In my work with executives and senior leadership teams and boards, so often you can see how their workloads are imbalanced. there's not self-care. They're answering emails on Saturday at 11 p.m. and there's all of these different habits. And it could be because it's of an altruistic cause, be something that really matters, that's something that people are really passionate about. And at the same time, I always tell folks, like, it starts with you. It starts with each individual taking the time to just self-reflect. What are my values? Am I operating within these values? Thinking about the power they have over people. Like, people spend the majority of their time at work, not just in their day, but in their entire life. And I think, Sarah, I think you and I, we've talked before, like the vision of workplaces that like center compassion and well-being. And when you're in one of those, if you're lucky enough to be in one of those workplaces and experience that, I certainly have experienced that, you thrive in all of these other aspects. You're a better partner, you're a better neighbor, you're a better father, son, sister, etc. And the opposite is true. When you're in systems that don't center your humanity, that don't really take into account, like, how is this human being at work? It's like, no, you're a person filling a seat to produce an outcome. And we're seeing that those have detrimental outcomes, not just on the business, but on people on an individual level. And so I just love that you are talking about this. I love that you wrote a book all about it and that people and organizations can hire you and Compassionate to do that. So we'll be sending all that info. Before we kind of close and kind of do some like end housekeeping, is there any like final messages about this book, about that you want, whether it's an individual, a manager, or a leader? Like, what do you want the like high level takeaway to be from this book?
Oh gosh, I really think people need to understand that compassion matters and that when it is prioritized, everything improves. So I feel like people think compassion is like, like that's kind of a soft, nice to have. We're not going to worry about it. I think it needs to be, if not the number one priority, right up there. So that's my main message. I know that I'm completely biased because this is my work, but from my point of view, compassion matters almost more than almost anything else.
I think you're right. And I think my lived experience personally and professionally and the people that I talk to, it's also an understanding of what is compassion, offering it to yourself, and then creating the capacity and intentionality to how are you going to offer it to others. It doesn't mean that you're perfect and you get it right every day. It just means that there is a moment or moments to self-reflect and be really deliberately intentional about how do you want to show up? What kind of impact do you want to have on yourself and the people around you? Do you hold power and influence over people, whether that's over the schedules, how much money they make, when they make, how they work? All of those things really, really can determine whether someone has a good quality of life or a not good quality of life. And then there's many of us who we are in situations where we can't just quit our job. We can't just leave. And the manager is who they are. And so all we can do is develop skills and mindsets to self-preserve and still allow ourselves to, remain whole. And also, if and when we need it, kind of look and say, okay, what is my exit strategy? Maybe it's not today, maybe it's not tomorrow or even next month, but what is my long game? Because I care enough about myself to take care of myself. And if you're not going to see the value in my humanity, then I will be like all these millennials and Gen Zs and say, next, thank you, perfect. And, you can work with us. So Angel, if you want to show the slide, I just want to let people know that there are ways to kind of work with me and Angel, whether on an individual basis or with your team. So Hatching Hour, this is our, an offering where we bring dynamic people like Sarah on who come and share their wisdom and their knowledge and experiences so that we can all live better and work better. But we also do work with companies and organizations doing culture assessments, employee engagement strategies. And like I mentioned in my last role, that's what I did. Angel has well over a decade of change management and leadership experience. And so you get all this personality plus some experience, right, to come and help your employees have a better experience at work so that they stay and they produce the goals and are motivated to accomplish whatever your organization accomplishes. And something that is really exciting, we're doing individual and team coaching right now, which I'm having a great time doing, kind of like a 360, like we'll work with the leader and the team so that we're holistically helping the team and create more systems. And of course, you can hire us to speak to your team, run a workshop. We recently did a leadership retreat for the Department of Animal Services for Riverside. That was such a great time that we decided we want to now offer that as a service. So if you're interested in working with us or just want to explore what that could look like, Angel's going to drop a link to how to get in contact with us and schedule a meeting so we can work together. Sara, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone on the call.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Vanessa.